in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander project. I'm also a practicing artist, and I'm having a yarn today with two amazing curators of Indigenous art at the National Gallery of Victoria. Before I introduce Myles and Hannah, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm zooming in from, which is the shared country of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I would like to extend that out to all the countries we find ourselves on today, and I want to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. I would also like to remind people that sovereignty was never ceded. My guests today are both curators at the National Gallery of Victoria in Indigenous art. So I think they're more than qualified to have a yarn about all things Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art. I will use the word Indigenous and Aboriginal interchangeably, but we're really talking about the art of the two Indigenous peoples of Australia, the Aboriginal people and the Torres Strait Islander people. Hi, Hannah and Myles. Welcome to Thorn Harbour Health's Aboriginal Art Yarn.
Thanks so much for having me.
Can we start by, I'm going to get you to introduce yourselves and sort of tell us about your role at the National Gallery of Victoria, and maybe you could even talk about how it sort of changed during the COVID pandemic, which we're still in at the moment and under lockdown here in Melbourne.
No worries.
Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to go first. So, yeah, I'll also acknowledge and pay respects to the Aboriginal community whose land I am on, which is also the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of Naarm in Melbourne. And I have been living in Melbourne my whole life. I grew up here on Kulin lands with the Kuru community, but my Aboriginal great-great-grandmother was born in a tin hut on the edge of the desert on Wotjobaluk land. And so I'm very proud of all parts of my heritage, which includes Aboriginal as well as English and German and Irish and a lot of things, I'm sure. And yes, I'm also gay and I'm male. So I've been at the NGV for I think about 5 years, working as curator of Indigenous art. Before that, I was working at Museum Victoria as a collection manager, and then an assistant curator. And before that, I was at Swinburne University in the Faculty of Design, where I was teaching in history of design, as well as sort of fundamental principles of design, and as well as Indigenous studies. So yeah, I've been at the gallery for 5 years, and very happy to be here.
Thanks, Myles.
Thanks, Myles.
Hi, I'm Hannah Presley. My family come from Pepperminardi in the Northern Territory, but my grandfather was part of the Stolen generation, and he was taken to Alice Springs. So I've got a huge family in Alice, and I spent a lot of time up there. But I actually was born and grew up in Melbourne, so it's quite special to be here and to be working at our National Gallery. I've only been at the gallery, I think, just on a year.
It's over a year. I looked it up. You've been there over a year now.
Oh, is it over a year now?
Yeah.
Oh, it's all a blur. To have my first year in such an important institution be mostly at home. I think most of this year we've been working from home. Peter, you asked about how we're dealing with COVID. Thank God for technology. We've pulled together, and we're working really well despite what's going on, and we're also grateful to have that opportunity. I know there's so many of our mob out there that are hurting at this time, so yeah, we're quite privileged at the moment to be where we are, I think.
It's I think to your point, Peter, about how COVID has really affected our working. We were one of the, if not the first institution in Australia to really move to working from home. It happened very, very early. It was kind of the start of March. And yeah, we fell into a pretty good groove in terms of working remotely across, WebEx and Zoom and different things. And I think there have been some parts of our job that have been made easier, and then there are some parts that have been made much harder. It's nice to get a bit of time to do writing and things without being disturbed, but it can be very alienating and very isolating. And also, sometimes it's easier to just talk to someone in the corridor than it is to organise a Zoom meeting or whatever it is. And so things kind of can take a bit longer. But I think we've adapted pretty well.
And we're so far away from the actual galleries. That's been really hard as well for our planning and just to be around the art, Peter. We're so lucky. Normally every day we get to see extraordinary works of art hanging on our walls, and now we've got our home collections to satisfy us.
Well, I really miss visiting the gallery. It's something that nurtures my soul as a person, and going to see the Indigenous collections in the NGV are one of those things, and other galleries like the Kura Heritage Trust, which we might talk about later on, and mainstream commercial galleries as well. So yeah, it's really hard. So I can understand you not being in that environment. So
and there's been an amazing, sorry, Peter, there's been an amazing kind of push for NGV online programming, and we have had more kind of traffic through our website and our social media, I think, than, we ever could have imagined. And some art translates really well to that medium, but then other works don't. So it's kind of, I almost feel like I'm discovering some parts of the collection in a new way. Video works are real, and photography can translate really well on screen, but a lot of our kind of sculptural works and things that really rely on the materiality and being present and having
experience.
Yeah, they just don't work on Instagram or on the website. So, yeah.
I guess we've been adjusting as well. This is my work at Thorn Harbour Health. We've gone online and we're expanding our audiences and gone into new areas of well-being as well. And one of these, art's so good for well-being, and the audience will be, interested to see and talk about Aboriginal art, because we'll have people who are across it and other people who are really novices to it. So the questions I've sort of come up with, but come from, some of my colleagues, non-Indigenous colleagues in health promotion, and we just sort of brainstorm them. So I guess I'm going to hit you with a really big question. What is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art? Like in a lot of ways, is it just dot art? How does it reflect Indigenous diversity? Is it geographical, urban versus remote? Anyway, there are lots of things to unpack. Well, we could unpack for a long time, but just that question.
We're responsible in our roles not only for Australian Indigenous art, but also for global First Nations art, which is a very big collection area and also covers a lot of different communities. But definitely the majority of work that we do is around Australian Pacific art and Torres Strait. And so I guess that kind of, what is Indigenous art? I mean, what is art?
Yeah.
That's the answer to the question. It's art made by Indigenous people. It can be anything. We have a collection that spans from neon to bark to repurposed painted card doors and prints, drawings, photography, video, sound art, performance, you name it, and it's in the collection. We have really an extraordinary collection, and the diversity of what is Indigenous art is very much reflected in that.
Yeah, I would agree, Peter. I think it's Aboriginal art has, people like to put it in these little categories, but our artists keep proving that you just can't do that. Indigenous artists are artists in their own right. They're expressing things however any other artist does. And you would know this, Peter, as one of our important Koori artists down here. whatever materials artists want to express themselves in, they now have access to. And I think that kind of access has changed the possibilities for what Aboriginal art is, and artists are driving that. And as curators, we, like you said, our role is to explain to people what's happening and that it's contemporary art and how it fits in. But yeah, those parameters are really outdated. Yeah, there's no color palette that the majority is stuck in, or we're not stuck making batiks or only working with acrylic on canvas. It's like Myles said, our collection is the perfect kind of example of how diverse making is in this country.
Kind of, as curators, it can be quite challenging because we have specialist curators for works on paper, we have specialist curators for photography and for fashion and textiles, and within the collection area that Hannah and I are lucky enough to look after, I mean, something like a bark painting. What conservator looks after that? Is it the painting's conservator? Is it the object's conservator? Is it the person who looks after wood, and furniture? Honestly, it's such a extraordinary breadth to the collection and to what we look at, that often the best thing we can possibly do is just put it back to the community, put it back to the artist. How do you care for your material? How do you want to kind of look after your material? Speak about it, curate it, whatever, because it's just so big to be able to kind of cover it all. It's not possible. It's like being curator of European art, it's as diverse as that.
Does that make sense, Peter?
Yeah, no, look, to me it does. But I'm just thinking, people out there, there's been a lot of, over the years, pigeonholing of Aboriginal art, and we've got to explain that our nations are very diverse and that we're a diverse people. I think sometimes colonisation has made us all one and brought us to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but we're really all these diverse nations,
and that's
out of that spawn heaps of art.
That's it. The pigeonholing of Indigenous art is no different to the kind of the stereotypes and expectations that people have that Indigenous people look and sound the same way. That's exactly it. There's an expectation that Aboriginal people and our material culture and our art, that it look a certain way, be a certain way. Oh, I'm getting feedback. And I think
also, Myles, it's people. I find when I'm talking to the public about Aboriginal art, things come up around authenticity. This idea that things are either real Aboriginal art or they're not. And I think there's a lot of work that's done around identity and has been done for decades in explaining that diversity that Myles is talking about, that reflects back to material usage and, how people are telling their stories, how Indigenous artists are telling their stories. And the one thing that I always like to tell people when they're like, oh, this sacred stuff, it's, artists are very aware that they're making work for audiences. They're not careless, carelessly putting things that aren't for audiences on work that's being sold to, galleries around the world and for personal collections. We know what we can say. So that's not something that the audience in general needs to be concerned about. I think that's, there's still lots of kind of myths around, what information can be accessed. And I think that we've come a long way in that, and that the public just need to be secure in knowing when they're looking at Aboriginal art that the artist that made it knew that they'd be looking at it.
Authenticity is such a big issue, as, it always hangs over, and, people think they can get a certificate of authenticity, and I guess it's really important point.
And I think that still plays a role in a lot of our arts communities. certificates of authenticity still exist in a lot of our remote communities. And that is a direct response to, dodgy dealings that have happened over the past decades, where people that maybe shouldn't have access to these communities and these important artists are getting access. And that's a safety thing. I think as an industry, we're always working on new ways to talk about that role of authenticity. But I think when it comes to this idea of secret sacred, as curators, but also as artists, that responsibility is understood. People aren't sharing things that they shouldn't be at this, in this day and age. We're really aware of where artists are really aware of where their work is being shown and that it is for an audience. And so all the layers of meaning and, whatever the stories or concepts are behind the work, they're all there to be shared. And artists are getting better and better at explaining that stuff for wider audiences, I think, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think that whole question of authenticity is, it's just a form of racism, and it's this idea that Indigenous people are somehow at odds with modernity. And to be Indigenous, authentically Indigenous, you must be living in a remote community. You must look a certain way. You must work with a certain material. Art must be on bark, or it must, be with ochre. Or it's this idea that Aboriginal people somehow aren't able to participate in modernity, and it's just complete rubbish. Because of course we know that Aboriginal people look like us. They can look like anybody. They can work with any material. So I think it's actually a form of racism.
I agree. So leading on from that, what's the link between art and culture? How would you just, that is art our culture? Culture is art.
Yeah, I think sometimes artists can feel a bit trapped by that, but I think generally, most of the artists that we're working with, that's a really important part of, expressing who they are and what their stories are. That comes through in their artwork. We've always been visual people back since the beginning of time, storytellers, performers. This is just an extension of that, I think. Myles, you might have more to say on that.
Well, I think if culture is kind of broadly the way in which human beings interface with the natural world, then art is a form of culture, and it's a way of making sense of our lives and our feelings and our past and our future. And I think it's about a way of communicating what happens inside with other people, which is, I think it's the most authentic and true way to communicate what happens inside. And so that's why it's so valuable, and that's why it gets really, frustrating when people don't understand the value of art, because I think people forget just how difficult it is to try and be a human being talking to another human being and explaining who you are, your past, your feelings, your history. And art helps that. Art allows us to do that.
And a lot of our works of art in our collection, Peter, they talk about place in a way that has been, transferred across generations. There's knowledge in these artworks as records of time, of place. There's generational sharing going on that I think can also be learnt from. That's all of our history. That's not just Aboriginal people's history. This is for everyone. And I'm working on a collection show at the moment called Big Weather. And the whole idea around that, Peter, is to bring works together that really highlight how important our Indigenous cultural knowledge is through these works of art, in connecting to place and understanding place. We had, such devastating bushfires last season, which really inspired this show, I think, you know, we all started thinking about our Indigenous rangers, our traditional owners that understood how the country works, how fire, you know, the relationship with fire on their country, started maybe getting a bit more of an audience and a bit more respect. And that really made me start seeing our collection as, you know, it's keepers, we're keepers of knowledge of this country as well. These stories are, you know, these learnings from, you know, many generations exist in this art. It's living, breathing, you know, art, you know. Yeah.
I'll just back that up. My own experiences and what Myles was saying, and you're saying, Hannah, is that sometimes I can communicate more of my feelings, emotions, and my story as an arrogant person and the journey I've been on. You know, I was adopted out. You know, and I can say it more in visual ways. You know, that being queer, being Aboriginal, what does that mean? Thinking about that stuff.
When you were talking just then, it reminded me how, Myles, how you talk about Destiny's artwork, that the emotion that is portrayed and the tools that she uses in her work. You're not alone in that, Peter.
Well, maybe leading on from that, I was going to ask about, you know, some of the strategies that contemporary Aboriginal artists are using or exploring. So if you want to elaborate on, I don't know, and I know, Hannah, you've had experience in Alice and more remote communities, and I was thinking about letting people know about art centres and that we do have some in Victoria as well, and places, yeah, anyway.
Did you want to speak to Destiny, Myles?
Sure.
Yeah, maybe.
As an individual artist, I mean, she is very much an interdisciplinary artist who will predominantly works with photography, but she works with installation, video, sculpture, performance, and she is quite remarkable in her ability to kind of pull you in, and then make you feel comfortable, and then use that kind of moment where your guard is down to talk about something that's really really quite complicated and quite difficult. She kind of has one of her maxims is, you know, she likes to think there's a laugh and a tear in every photograph. Which is kind of this idea that, you know, if she says if she makes people laugh, that way they don't feel the knife go in. And it's this kind of, it's brilliant because what you really do is it's about making sense of tragedy through comedy. And that's something that I think queer people share in common with Aboriginal people. Anyone who has been part of a community that has been oppressed by the government and that has been marginalised, I think develops these sorts of coping strategies around comedy and humour and music and performance, and as a way of kind of making sense of all of the kind of trauma of the past. So Destiny is an amazing example of someone whose work really, I think, speaks to a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And there's those kind of coded symbols for queer people and also for Aboriginal Indigenous people in her work. But then it's also there for people who are outside of those communities as a kind of gateway into understanding a little bit about what it's like.
Good strategy.
I like that very much.
Yeah.
I can't wait to come in and see it.
I've been hanging out to see it. Yeah, shit. When's that opening, Myles?
Oh, how long is a piece of string? I don't know. 23rd of November is when we have announced the date. Fingers crossed. I've kind of not counting my chickens because I've I've told all of my friends and family. I think 3 or 4 opening dates now, and none of them have happened.
So many false starts.
Yeah, false start. I am confident that the 23rd of November is looking likely. By the way, it's also my birthday, so a great birthday present.
Sounds good. Peter, you asked about art centres. Yeah, Indigenous art centres, remote art centres, they're the heart of a lot of our remote communities. Art centres play a massive role in supporting artists, but also in, lots of different ways in the health and well-being of remote communities. There's some amazing art centre managers out there that support artists to create the work that they want to create, and that speaks back to that idea of artists being able to flourish and play with whatever materials and whatever palette that they want. One art centre that I'll mention is Iwansha Arts in Indokina on the APY lands. At the moment, they are, I have to say it, they're on fire. That's where Vincent Namatjira has come from, yes. So obviously with his Archibald win, we can't not mention how extraordinary that was. And artists like Kayleen Whiskey, they're creating work that talks about, again, what you were saying, Myles, about modernity. Kayleen Whiskey uses, references of all the music that she loves, of Cher and Dolly Parton and, Coca-Cola. And I think when she first hit the scene, there were people, and even now, that are just like, what is that connection? What is, I thought this community was really remote. And it's like, no, it's 2020. There's nowhere that hasn't been touched by Dolly Parton now. So art centres are really important for our communities, yeah. And if anybody's interested, I always suggest that people look up Desart or Anchor or some of the state bodies that oversee art centres. It's a way to support artists. You can find lots of information about all the different art centres. And keeping that middleman of an art dealer is sometimes a good way to support an artist directly, and art centres do that. There's lots of different ways to buy and access art, but yeah, supporting art centres is always a good thing.
Yeah, I thought I'd mention it. And people just think of art centres as a remote community, but we do have a couple in Victoria as well.
Yeah, we do. Important ones. Bullock Arts in Mornington, Gallery Kaila in Shepparton. These are hubs for people in those areas. And yeah, we're really lucky to have that. I think in the southeast generally, artists work a lot more independently. We're in amongst the community in maybe a different way. We're not in concentrated groups like in more remote areas. So it is unusual to have these art centres down here, but they're doing really well. And again, if you're in the area, support our artists through these art centres. Look these guys up, follow them on social media. It will give you a better understanding of what's really happening out there in Indigenous art, looking at this community-based work. And, if you're interested, that's a really good place to start.
Thanks, Hannah. Myles, we talked a bit about queer art, but there's a big queer show scheduled for next year at the NGV, and you're a curator on that. And I just wondered, will there be some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders artists showcased in it? And maybe you just want to promote it a bit to the audience here of Thorn Harbour as well, just to keep it, pencil it in their diary.
So yeah, we just announced Queer, which is an exhibition for the end of 2021 that is looking at queer stories drawn from the NGV collection. And it really, the genesis for this project was, I'm one of the co-editors of the NGV Art Journal with my colleague Angela Hessen, who's curator of Australian art. And we really, it was 2017 when it was the marriage equality debacle, debate, whatever you want to call it. And we wanted to do a queer themed issue of the Art Journal, which is usually about 6 or 7 essays, all connected to one work in the collection. And I suppose it was when we were putting together that issue that we realised there was well more than 6 or 7 stories to be told. There were literally hundreds and hundreds of works in the collection that had queer stories, either in terms of the provenance of the work, the artist, the subject matter, stories that are relevant to the queer community for all different reasons, and that you never find on a label. It's very hard to put everything that is interesting about a work in 100 words on a label. So this felt like a great opportunity to, rather than kind of doing a big queer art show, queer the collection, sort of look at our own collection with a queer lens, and bring out some of those stories that have always been there. They've just been in the shadows. And as queer people, we're used to looking for recognition wherever we can find it, looking, for our reflection in galleries, despite it not being on labels. But this is just a great moment, I think, for the gallery to really just have a big queer takeover. And yes, there will absolutely be Aboriginal queer stories in there, as well as First Nations queer stories from around the world.
Right.
So yeah.
Including your work, Peter.
I didn't know that was going to be it.
Oh no! Come on.
No, working with you over the years, Peter, has been an amazing journey in understanding, the way that Indigenous queer, issues exist in the world. The history of, that being hidden somewhat on purpose by missionaries, and all this complexity that you speak of has been so important to my own understanding, Peter. Working with you on A Lightness of Spirit, I'd love for you to tell us a bit about your cloak, because that really speaks to understanding queer Indigenous art, I think.
Well, I guess the cloak, which has been purchased by the Victorian Pride Centre, so it's going to be in the foyer of the new building when that opens up after COVID restrictions. So I'm really happy. It's in a community space.
Congratulations.
And it's a traditional possum skin cloak, which is something that was revived by a group of Koori women artists, and I was guided in making the cloak by Marie Clark, who's had an amazing career and is an amazing mentor, an amazing person. I've had since I've been in Melbourne since 2003, and meeting Marie and yourself, Hannah, and yourself, Myles. It's been a really nice journey. I guess the cloak speaks about, it has a cross on the back made of a different kind of fur when we stitched it, and usually the underside or the skin side of the cloaks are decorated with, local totems or landscapes or meanings to that person. And what I did was turn it into a rainbow. I used traditional Koori shield designs and then used inks to colour the work. So it's like you carry a cross on your back and all the invisibility, and we talk about that in the queer world, about our erasure and in colonisation, and how, but I also talk about the vibrancy of our community now and celebrating it. So I think the cloak's about that as well, and carrying that rainbow, that queer mob together and supporting them. So that's a bit about my cloak, and it will be on show at the Pride Centre, which I'm really, I don't know, I'm just so super excited about that. I couldn't think of a better place for it to be, so.
Yeah. No, congratulations.
Well, we're so excited to
Thanks.
be working on this show and, partnering with lots of organisations like Pride Centre and yourselves at Thorn Harbour, and just hopefully having a kind of a big, like I said, big kind of queer takeover. And yeah, that is just such an extraordinary work, Peter, that cloak. I remember first seeing that obviously at Hannah's show at ACCA, and your performance in that, because performance is also an important history for queer art as well, and that was just such an extraordinary kind of embodiment of that object. And yeah, can't wait to see it again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we don't have the cloak in the collection, obviously, but we have a beautiful art book that you did, Peter. That we've recently acquired. That will be in the
yeah.
collection. So.
Wow, that's fantastic. Now I'm blushing. Look, I've been really lucky and, had an amazing art career. And I do balance it with my work at Thorn Harbour and my community development work, because I'm really interested in that side of life as well, the two worlds coming together. Is there any last things you'd like to say about Aboriginal art today to the audience? Yeah.
I think if you're interested in Aboriginal art and you don't know that much, there's so many things that you can do now and access to get a better understanding. And I think, remind yourself that you don't always have to like it. It's not always going to be easy, but there's stories there that, there's ownership there for you as well. Our collection shows are always a really good way to get a sense of the diversity that exists in Indigenous art. And there's so much richness there. You're missing out if you're not looking at what some of our contemporary artists are doing. So, jump in.
Yeah,
Thanks, Hannah. Good advice.
And, obviously, NGV, we run a lot of short courses and a lot of adult education courses, as well as introductions to Indigenous art, in addition to collection displays and other thematic exhibitions that we have. There's a number of Indigenous artists with work in the Triennial that's upcoming, as well as Destiny's solo retrospective, big show on TV opening soon. Hannah mentioned Big Weather, which is a super exciting show in March. But look, at other than the NGV as well, there's a lot of great other galleries, to get a real sense of the kind of historical material as well as the contemporary. Bunjalaka at Museum Victoria is a great resource, and Koori Heritage Trust as well. So yeah, I guess it's just, for anyone who wants to learn, start there. But also, I'd just like to, I guess, specifically address any mob who are watching as well, to know that we don't own the collection. It belongs to you. So if you ever want to see anything that's not on display, or if you ever want access to any of the material, all you have to do is contact just general inquiries and say this is what you're interested in, and we absolutely prioritise those visits. Obviously, we can't do it right now during lockdown, but as soon as we're in the gallery, it's important for people to know we do have a specific community viewing room, and there is absolutely we're always welcoming to anyone who wants to see parts of the collection that might not be on display.
Yeah, especially for family, for artists that are looking for, inspiration or understanding of materiality, anything. We've got some amazing works in that collection, and like Myles said, it belongs to everyone. We're just keepers of it, curators of it.
Yeah, great.
So reach out.
And in the past, I did a project with Ballarat's collection, of colonial prints that have featured a lot of Indigenous people. So yeah, and I think it's really important that we have access to these collections. And I've seen some of the Bunjalakas and the Koori Heritage Trust as well, because they connect us to culture, and they inspire our contemporary art as well, and our being. All right, Hannah and Myles, thank you so much for your time and expertise today.
Oh, thanks.
And I want to thank the audience. And I hope they've learned a bit more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art today. Take care, and thank you, Hannah and Myles.
Such a pleasure, Peter. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
See you, everyone. Bye for now.